This is a homage beat.
If any way to describe him, I think he would first and foremost describe himself as a husband, a father, a pastor, and just upon recently, an author. This man's time is extremely, extremely valuable, and so I'm honored, thoroughly honored to have this person here. I would even go out to say that I don't know if I spoke on this on the podcast, but I moved from Virginia to North Carolina, knowing that I would have to find a new church home, and I would listen. It's ironic because I would listen to podcasts, and this was one of the podcasts that I would listen to. Vision Church has a podcast on iTunes. I knew I would be moving to Raleigh. Just happened to stumble across it. Just never heard. Just heard really solid preaching. You know, the way to my heart is just good gospel-centered preaching, and that's what I heard. That's what I heard from this individual, and just what he championed, not just the gospel, but just having it lived out. And I know diversity is like a cliche word, but just making that real. And just seeing that I could just get that feel just from listening to a podcast. So when I actually moved down and visited the church, it was a pleasant surprise to see that it wasn't just talk, you know, that not just Pastor Jerome, but the people he shepherds living it out. So when I got here last year, I was excited, me and my wife, to join the church. And just ever since, this man has accepted me as a brother. Just been able to build. Actually on Mondays, just his humility, just the example of he is as a man. That I heard that he was just doing sermon preparation with some people at the church, and I asked, could I tag along? And like I said, he didn't really know me from Adam, but he allowed me to come along and build together. Even allowed me this past June to stand in the pulpit and preach my first ever sermon. So I owe a lot to this man right here, and I'm just honored to have him on the podcast. And I know Sandy already introduced him by calling him out, but my friend, my brother, Pastor Jerome Gay, how are you doing?
Thank you for being here. Man, I'm doing fantastic. I don't deserve an intro like that, but I appreciate it. And no, Sandy is not fired for calling me out. He's still with the team. He's still with the church. And so I appreciate you and Marlena and little baby Autumn. Love you and your family. Love just the entire family at Vision Church. So I'm honored to be able to be here and be on I Saw the Lord. So I'm excited about what God is doing in and through you, excited about this podcast, and I am grateful. I count it a privilege and an honor to be here, so I'm looking forward to it.
No, I appreciate that as well. And like I said, I do just respect, I know everybody's time is valuable, but I understand that you're doing so many things. Like I said, you just became an author. That's another challenge in and of itself.
Yes, it is.
And as a
that
fellow
you know
author,
about, you know
about
that. Yeah.
Just trying to get the word out, just trying to get people to see the vision.
Right.
No pun intended.
Right.
On what you were trying to communicate. And like I said, I did want to make it a priority to support, because I think just even supporting each other is huge.
Absolutely.
So I've got somewhat of a platform, you know, the two people and my mom listening, you know, some people listening, but just to take time out and just get you to talk a little bit about the book that you've written called Renewal. So just briefly, you could tell us a little bit about it, where we can find it, just plug it.
Cool. Yeah, Renewal is a grace and redemption in the story of Ruth. And so basically it's just taking this timeless story and showing how it still applies to us today. And so dispelling the myth that the book of Ruth is this how to get a man story, that couldn't be further from the truth. It's really this idea of this outsider being redeemed by a guy named Boaz, who's a Gael, which means a kinsman redeemer, and ultimately he points us to Christ. So this story captures the meta-narrative being the overarching story of Scripture, which is the triune God as creator redeeming mankind to himself. And so he redeems this non-Jewish woman the same way Jesus does that. He welcomes the outsider and he accepts us. And so that's what Boaz does for her. And it's also this idea of having this renewed perspective on every aspect of life, from tragedy, because Naomi loses her husband and her two sons. How to recover from a bad decision. Elimelech leaves Bethlehem and goes to Moab. You know, it's a bad decision. It cost him his life. But then how can you get restored hope? And so Naomi at one point wants to change her name to Tamara, which means bitter, But at the in chapter 4, at the end of the story, she has this child of promise in her lap, and it's through this child that we get to Obed, and Obed fathers Jesse, and Jesse fathers David, and it's through the lineage of David we get to Jesus. So that's kind of some summation of the book. It's actually on Amazon right now, so you can go to Amazon.com, type in Renewal,
ebook and physical.
Yeah,
copy
you can
as
get
well.
a Kindle and a physical copy, and the audio book is coming out
on the way.
first quarter next year.
And I'm gonna keep it real with you, because I know you say you were getting like free copies, and I was like hoping to like get a free copy.
Gotcha.
But I did go and purchase the ebook. I still would like a free physical
Gotcha,
copy.
gotcha. There you go.
I appreciate it.
Yeah,
And I gotta get you to sign it.
Nah.
But just, does it feel different now you have author as that title?
Yeah, it feels different. Like when you first get the book, it's like, I guess if you're an artist, hearing your music on radio for the first time. Like, so when you hold it and you know the process of, man, edits and mistakes and corrections, getting other people's opinions, endorsements, reviews, just the entire process. And for it to be here is something that I'll say I'm godly proud of, and just pray that God gets glorified through it.
Yeah, so from one author to another, congratulations.
Yeah,
I'm happy for you, and I know there's many more to
by
come.
His grace.
By
yeah.
His grace.
I'm going to enjoy this one for a while.
But yeah, definitely want to make sure to do that. But we're going to jump right into concept number 27, why is blood essential? And I remember we were talking about it, and I started off by saying this. I say blood is another concept we don't think about, but it's absolutely essential. We know blood is found in humans and animals, but we really don't think about how valuable it is, and I just talk about it from a scientific or biological perspective. Blood is vital and has several functions within the body. And I just want to start off with this question. Like, before even reading this, were you like aware of all the functions of blood? Because like I came up with the concept, but when I started researching, I didn't realize like how important blood was.
Yeah, I mean, I listened as well, and I listened to how you talked about how scientists break it up into three primary categories: transportation, protection, and regulation, right? And so just hearing that, it's like the transportation aspect was one I did. That's what threw me off. Like, transportation, like, what do you mean? But it's really the idea of sustenance, that we need blood in order to be sustained. Yeah. And so when I begin to think about that, I wanted to look at the scientific definition and then kind of go to the scriptures, because I believe the scriptures actually influence science, right? So even down to the first 10 words of the Bible, we talk about time, space, and matter, right? That's kind of one of the foundational philosophies of science. Yeah. But we'll think about that into the first 10 words of the Bible. In the beginning, that's time. God created the heavens, that's space, and the earth. That's matter, right? So you see this idea of the scriptures actually influencing and informing science. So,
absolutely. And like I said, I think I did kind of know about the protection, like the white blood cells, but transportation and then even regulating blood pressure. Right. You know, those are things I didn't think about. So I talked about blood and like I said, when I open up the chapters, I always just try to take an objective look. These are not things that can be disputed. Right. You know, I'm always trying to think of someone who does not come from a biblical worldview. Right. All I'm doing is stating facts. Right. Just stating facts, just objectively looking at it. So I talk about blood from a scientific perspective. But I also talk about science from a social perspective. I say, alarmingly, in the U.S., someone is in need of blood every 2 seconds. Wow. As a result, more than 41,000 blood donations are needed every day. And I like to
every day.
Yeah, it's crazy
Daily.
to think about.
Wow.
And I like to pride myself on being someone who's like logical and rational. And I think I even told you this earlier. But I'm a bit of a conspiracy theorist when it comes to that, because it's like you're giving something so valuable. Because you don't know what they're going to do with it. And it just bugs me out. But I didn't know half of this stuff, that how important blood was. Like, even because I know even in the black community, sickle cell is huge, you know. But it says people who have sickle cell need frequent blood transfusions through their lives. So just from a scientific, we see how important blood is. But just in a social aspect, giving blood can help save another person's life. And it was just like, I kind of knew it, but I didn't know how important blood was in that aspect, just in a social setting. So I talked about blood and just those two aspects. And then there was a third one that I talked about that most people don't really acknowledge. I talk about blood in like a religious sense, where it's like, just historically speaking, however one feels about religion, these were history, you know. There were so many civilizations that blood was essential in sacrifices. And a lot of times, if we're going to be honest, some of these religions practice human sacrifices. I say, civilizations such as the Egyptians, the Incas, the Mesopotamians, the Celts, the Chinese, and the Etruscans, they all practice human sacrifices. And from, again, someone who's a atheist or an evolutionist looking at religion, they kind of group all religions as that. And I say, how do we respond to those who disregard religion in its entirety due to the practices of human sacrifice? Because they'll say, look at these people who are practicing religion, they're doing human, and we would say human sacrifices are wrong, but then they would say religion in its entirety is wrong because look how foolish they're acting by sacrificing humans. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think even the idea that religious people have a monopoly on depravity is laughable. Ooh. So when you study history and you look at some of the primary atheists, when we talk about the origin of species, right?
Yeah.
I mean, even within that book, he purports this idea, this racist idea of non-white races.
Yeah. That
they're subservient, that they're barbaric. That they're inhumane, right? Mm-hmm. So when people try to only point to religious people as we are the most, if you can measure depravity, that we're the most depraved, it just doesn't hold weight. It doesn't make logical sense, and it doesn't hold historical weight when you look at some of the things that people did in the name of non-religion, or not just atheists, but even the category of anti-theists. They're against all forms of spirituality and those that will place faith in what they believe to be fairy tales. So I think we have to go back and say, when you study history and you look at some of these people, even Hitler before, some people try to say he claimed Christianity, but when you actually study, this man was actually an irreligious person and just saw people as a means to an end. So when you study things like that, it doesn't make sense to try to place all depravity at the foot of those that have faith.
Yeah.
Not even just the Christian faith, just those that have faith in general.
And I may be essentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think so oftentimes it's called the straw man argument, where they point to the weakest argument and then just make it all. So we would agree that human sacrifices are wrong and that religions have practiced it. They are wrong. But to group and just say all religion is bad because of that, because like you said, it ignores that there was a religion called Judaism that spoke against human sacrifice. Now they did practice sacrificing, but they said human sacrifices were wrong. And it even goes in, I quoted Deuteronomy 18:10. It says, "There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or daughter pass through the fire." It's a reference to what human sacrifice, because I think even back at that time there was a huge practice, and I could be wrong, Moloch, where they would sacrifice the children to Moloch, and God strictly forbade that. And so it's just for you to say, because we see these religions practicing and then to group all religions, no, all religions did not practice it. In fact, Judaism called it out and said, don't do this.